And now is the part where we invite all of you to share your background. So everyone who has joined us, please enter in the chat a little bit about your knowledge here. So do you know anyone with a disability? What are some types of disabilities, and why is it important to modify our presentations and programs to make them more accessible? Let's start with that first question. Everyone online, everyone who has joined us, do you know anyone who happens to have a disability? We're going to give you about 20 seconds to enter your thoughts in the chat box. Do you know folks with disabilities? Michele and Cass and Laura Jean, could you let me know, what are people answering? I'm not going to open up the chat box because that will create another gray square on top of what is already a bunch of gray squares on my screen.
Well, everyone that is answering yes.
So about 13 of you have said that yes, you do indeed know someone with a disability. Does anyone want to jot down in the chat box what are some examples of some different types of disabilities that we might have, that we, our friends, our colleagues might have?
Michele did put down autism.
Autism.
We have J.A. Greer, mental disability, PTSD, DID, ADD, etc., physical disability, chronic illness, asthma, autism spectrum disorder, deafness, hard of hearing, auditory, visual impairments, blindness.
Has someone already said anything about physical limitations in terms of maneuvering?
I just see physical disability, chronic illness, asthma.
Okay. Not mobility impairment. I don't
mobility.
See
Thank you, Cass.
See that? You see that, Cass?
No, I said they did not. We have not.
Oh, okay, yeah, I don't see that.
But yeah, mobility, absolutely. So, okay, great.
Oh, and MS is one, yeah.
MS, absolutely. So why is it important to modify our presentations and programs to make them more accessible for people with all sorts of different abilities, differing levels of ability? Anyone have some thoughts that they want to share on that?
We want and need everyone to engage so someone doesn't feel left out. Everyone deserves the same access to the material. Different people learn in different ways.
Great answers. And we'll get more into this in some of the presentations coming up. So thank you so much for that. One point I wanted to note here, but I wanted to let our participants and our speakers expand upon something that many of us we're still constantly learning, right? And one key notion, one key idea is not to define a person or an audience by a particular disability, that not letting that disability define who that person is or who that audience is. Does anyone want to say any more on that topic?
Are you talking to the speakers or the general audience?
Let's start with our speakers.
Okay, yes. So the idea of identifying somebody just by their disability is actually pointing out that disability, right? So it's actually segregating them from the rest of the group. And when we talk today, you'll hear a lot about universal design learning, universal instructional design. It doesn't say universal disabled design, right? So that's the ticket. The key is to try to design everything that you're doing to engage the widest number of abilities that you are encountering without pointing out something specific. And we're gonna give you some tools on how to do that. But yeah, I happen to be disabled. I've been disabled for 13 years. Michele has been in a wheelchair since she is 16 years old. She's a quadriplegic. And so we also live the experience. And the one thing we don't like is when we want to be accommodated if it's necessary, but we don't want to be pointed out or segregated because of the disabilities. So we want to participate within the confines of our limitations.
Sorry to cut you off, Laura. I think it limits you. if you have in your head going into a program that everybody in my audience is going to have whatever that disability may be, it may limit you and cause you not to focus on the audience's abilities rather than just focusing on their disability. And there's a lot of times that, as Laura says, you know, we both live life disabled. Unfortunately, we both have the perspective of knowing what, you know, society deems as living normal versus what society seems as being that poor disabled person. But I think that unique perspective allows us to look at the audience as a larger group. And we're able to think about all the disabilities, even though we might have one specific audience in mind: autism, mobility issues, whatever. There's multiply disabled people that they could have more than one issue that causes them to need some accommodations in the environment. So I think it's important not to limit, not to label anybody for regardless of what that reason might be. This way you're a little bit more aware that there could be different learning styles, which we're all very familiar with hearing about.
So to add to what you both said, it's very important to respect the person, the personality, the character, the charisma, everything that's about the person, not to focus, like you said, on the disability. And one good way to think about it is that we're all differently abled. Just like we're differently schooled, have different degrees and so forth, different careers, we're differently abled. Some can run fast, some can't run at all. So it's just the way that you approach working with things.
Thank you all so much. Well, let's go ahead and let's continue to let everyone here who has joined us know the structure of this. We're going to hear from Laura Jean Checki and Michele Daly, and then we're going to hear from Cass Runyon, and then we're going to do a brief activity and have plenty of time for Q&A. So we're glad to have all of you with us. Laura Jean Checki is a Solar System Ambassador. She's also the CEO for Interstellar Inspirations, which has a focus on Universal Instructional Design. Michele Daly is going to be speaking with her at the same time. They work together, and Michele Daly is the Director for Disability Education at Interstellar Inspirations, as well as the Director for Disability Education and the School District Program Coordinator at Meadowlands Environment Center. After they are done, Dr. Cassandra Runyon will be talking. She's a planetary scientist many of you have probably worked with before. She's also the Director of the NASA South Carolina Space Grant Consortium, and she has done a lot in terms of examining ways to enable all audiences to participate in space science and space STEM. So let's go ahead and continue. So Michele and Laura Jean, please take it away.
Okay, so again, I apologize for that noise in the background, but as Christine said, and thank you very much for inviting us to this webinar today. We're very excited to be here. We are trying to not just work with disabled audiences. The focus is on disabilities or disabled audiences because they're an underserved community, right? So we like to look at it more, again, like universal design. We're going to use the language universal instructional design instead of universal design learning, only because everything that you're seeing here in this slideshow is copyrighted under an NSF grant, and that was the language that was used inside of the grants. So we're going to continue with that universal instructional design language. So you can see right away that there is a bunch of little children here, and some of them you can clearly see might have a disability because there's a wheelchair, there's crutches, and some do not. I am a person that does not look disabled. Michele is clearly a person that looks disabled because she's in a wheelchair, right? She's a quadriplegic. So she tends to be overcompensated for her disability, and I tend to be undercompensated for my disability. A lot of times when I tell people I need an accommodation, which one big one for me is water. I actually have a prescription for water, which sounds insane, but I do. People just look at me like I'm fat. and lazy, and they don't want to accommodate. And I know that that's uncomfortable. A lot of times when you're talking about disabilities, it seems uncomfortable, but it really is a perception that people have. For instance, one of my brothers said to me, if I wasn't fat, I wouldn't be disabled. Okay, so that it is a perception out there that disability is something that can just, if you lose weight, it goes away. It's not an illness. You can't take medication and make it go away. So can we just advance to the next slide real quick? I believe the next slide is basically just an introduction of myself and Michele. So we've already done that. I'm actually the president of the company. She's the CEO, but our background is vast in this. We both started, well, she started earlier than I did, but again, under the NSF grant. And Michele, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can explain the next slide.
Wonderful, thank you. So, as Laura explained, we did receive about $850,000 from a National Science Foundation grant. And the purpose of our grant was to approach adults with disabilities in 5 different categories. And it was only 5 because that's how the grant was written. In 5 different categories, because adults with disabilities could tell us what worked and what didn't work with them in the field of science. We wanted all of our environmental science and space science programs to be accessible to the audience that we had. So we started with specific audiences. It was physical mobility, blind, visually impaired, cognitively disabled, and I'm using the old language because again, it was within the grant, deaf, hard of hearing, and adults with age-related disabilities. So in working with these adults, we came up with a 3-part model that we named the Marsh Access 3-part model of program accessibility. We started with the program design. Since we work oftentimes with teachers that are used to writing up their lesson plans, we wanted to have a design that people could just utilize within their environment to develop programs. So we first looked at what the most important part was, the science content, what we wanted to express to the group, what the specific content in our environment was, which would be the Meadowlands in New Jersey, what science tools we wanted to utilize during the program, and how we could have our audience document their experience, whether it be journaling, whether it be written, auditory, having a scribe, recording it. We came up with a whole bunch of different ways. So that was how we designed all of our program titles. Now, those were our standard programs. We tried to develop our programs for a middle school audience cognitively. That was our standard program, but we also stepped outside that standard box and looked to what would be the quote-unquote fun demental program for a lower cognitive audience or lower academic audience, or an enhanced version where we could move past the basic content and develop the program a little bit further. Utilizing those 2 designs, we came up with the pyramid of accessibility, because if you start at the bottom and think about the largest audience you could accommodate, regardless of what their disability is, you're probably going to incorporate into the program design a lot of the strategies and materials that you need. There are times in which you're still going to have to add something. So that would just be adding an accommodation. It could be for myself, my hands are paralyzed. So an accommodation to me would be providing me with an easy flow pen. It doesn't change any part of your program, but it's having that resource available so that it could address my specific disability related need in order to participate in the program. When the audience is a little bit, I don't want to say more disabled, I'm trying to think of the appropriate word. When the audience needs more accommodations or a specific modification, that's the next level, where you still focus on your science content and your specific area content and the science tools and the documentations, but you might have to take a step back and add something else that would be utilized by the group. So for example, that would be providing Braille journals, large print journals, journals with the size font in it that somebody with a visual disability would be able to participate in the program. It's something that you may readily have available, but you also may need to develop it and have on hand. And then the top of our program pyramid of accessibility is when you develop a special program. And that's when you just say, I want the content to be such, but I know that given the vast variety of disabilities within this group, we actually need to take a step back and just take one aspect of that program and completely design the program to meet everyone's needs at the top. And then, of course, you can go back and visit the standard program that you want, but you're actually chunking it down into smaller programs in order to meet the accessibility needs of a more severe group. As you can see, the National Science Foundation did fund us and copyright us for this. So we actually had, as a national model of program accessibility, we did provide our information throughout the nation when we did hold regional and national conferences. And to date, we've kept in touch with a lot of the people that we work with, a lot of the educators, and they are showing that they too found success with the model that we developed through the National Science Foundation grant. Laura?
Okay, so next slide. So that you heard Michele say a few different times to think outside of the box and to sort of have, you know, like in her case, a specific type of pen, and then you have that on hand. So there's a couple of things that are helpful if you're trying to reach a larger audience or you're trying to target a specific audience. And one of the things is you must test the products on the target audience, right? So to blindfold sighted people or put two left shoes on, or what's the other thing? Beer goggles, right, Michele? Things like that. It really doesn't work because I did it. It didn't work. So when I finally had everyone in front of me, all of the bosses and grant evaluator, and I tried to put these activities and programs before people who were blind, it made no sense to them because people who are sighted are still experiencing it as a sighted person, whatever you're putting before them. Okay, they're just blindfolded, but they're still experiencing it that way. So you have to test on the target audience if you're trying to reach a specific disability level. I'm sorry, could you please go back? You have to think outside the box. It's okay to think outside the box. Repetition and practice is the key to success. We have a saying that we like to talk about: modify on the fly. So if you're not in a classroom or you're not doing EPO, and let's just say I was talking before, I'm doing a research project now on diseases, viruses that are vectored by ticks and mosquitoes, right? So if you're doing something like that and you want to have audience experience it, then you modify on the fly. You can create an activity. I created this activity. I don't know how I did this, but to explain to children how to remove ticks. And so, you know, it was just modifying on the fly. And then I have this, and I put it in my box. Okay, well, I have this. So if I go somewhere, if I'm at a conference and a kid comes up or someone comes up and they say, how do I check for ticks on a dog, or how do I know what I'm feeling for, then I have that. If somebody like Michele comes into the room and I know that they need that pen, I have it in the box. So we tell people, build a box, right? Try to build a box. And in this way, you'll be able to accommodate the person next time, right? So one of the big issues that I feel is a problem with people that are not doing this on a daily basis is they feel as though if they don't have an accommodation for everyone in the room, somehow it's a program failure. And it's not a program failure. My disability is so variable that I don't know from day to day what my symptoms are going to be. So you can have a room full of people, let's say a lot of people had selected autism spectrum disorder for the people that they knew that were disabled. You could have 20 people in that room that have the same disability, and they'll all need a different accommodation. They'll be symptomatic in a different way and all need a different accommodation. So I tell people, be kind to yourself, right? And go up to the person who's disabled if you feel the need to, or if you feel like they're not experiencing the program the way that you would like to, and say, is there a way that we could have done this better? Is there an accommodation you could have that could have made this experience richer for you? And always let them know what they can expect from the program, beforehand so that they can let you know if they need an accommodation, right? So if there's going to be a lot of writing involved, obviously Michelle's going to need that specific type of pen. If there's going to be walking or there's going to be something waiting in line, I'm going to need a chair. So next slide, please. This is actually the final slide. Yeah, so you could just keep going through it until all the words come up. This is actually done in Universal Design. That's why it came up one at a time like that. So flexibility is the key. This circle here was created by Michele and Jean Valentinski under that grant. Well, all of this is part of the grant. And it's what you know is the smallest part of that pie. And what you don't know, it would be the next largest piece, but what you don't know is actually the biggest piece of that pie puzzle. And Michele and I are both part of this community. We're both disabled. We both work with people who are disabled. And I create curriculum for the 1 million residents. I work for the Department of Health here in Bergen County as well. And I've been doing this a long time. And my biggest part of that pie is what you don't know, right? So no matter how much experience you have, you really have to just continue to modify on the fly, keep building up that box so that the next time someone comes in and they display that that symptom or they need that accommodation, you have it in the box and you don't have to try to run around to try to get something. You know, the idea is to give the individuals the ability to participate. People that are disabled, most times, okay, not all times, depending on their cognitive function, they understand that their experience is going to be limited by that disability, right? So it's not about making everything 100% the same for someone who's disabled. It's about allowing them the opportunity to learn or to experience something within the confines and the limitations of their ability, whether they have a physical cognitive disability, a learning disorder, whatever that case may be. So if you could modify your products and programs to maximize the user's experience, that's what you're really trying to do. Forget about the disabled part of it. Overall, you're trying to modify that product to maximize the user's experience. So I tell people, be kind to yourself. Again, it's okay not to have the accommodation. It's okay, right? We're not looking for everybody to know right away. Next time you'll have it. So if you could just advance the slide real quick. This should be the second to last slide, I think. Oh, actually, it is the last slide. So this is just, you know, all of the different partners that have supported us and supported this. Like Michele said, the grant was basically, I think, 2010, everything was copyrighted. And this particular program is still going on. So I did this for the Buehler Challenger and Science Center, and then the Challenger Network adopted this program, but we called it No Star Out of Reach. So it's gone through different Bergen County Special Services, different government programs. So it really is, when you start thinking more in terms of making everything you have just more accessible to everyone, right? Because again, you're not going to know I'm disabled unless I tell you in that audience. So the more that you can just build that box and make it accessible to everyone, universally designed from the start, then you start modifying on the fly and building up your kit in your box so that you have those accommodations next time, the bigger the audiences that you will reach with whatever message you're trying to send.
I do want to just say one thing, Laura, because as you were speaking about the last slide, where, you know, they want to experience the same experience that everyone would get. It reminded me when we were working with a group of adults who were blind, visually impaired, and we were doing water quality testing, and we knew that they couldn't see the blue color that the ampule for dissolved oxygen would show. And we just were like, oh, and now you would do this. And they were like, well, why can't we do it? And we're like, well, because you won't be able to see the color. And they were like, well, who cares? I can still put the ampule in there. I can still feel the snap. I can still go through the of it, and just have as an accommodation somebody say on a, you know, the color looks similar to what you're holding in your left hand. So we felt, you know, kind of stupid at first, not thinking, hey, maybe they want to do it. But knowing that just because they have this one glaringly obvious disability to us, it still didn't matter to them. They wanted to be included as if they were just as visually capable as anyone else and go through the activity. So that was the first really eye-opening experience
Right.
for me. And they always stick out when we think about these people.
Yeah, and after that, we took them into the Star Lab. They wanted to do Star Lab. I mean, after that experience, because I was very surprised because they had to break that ampule. I didn't think that was a good thing. But you know what? It's not what you think. It's what, in other words, don't try to put yourself in the shoes of the person who's disabled, because you can. It's a nice thing to want to do, but you can't do it. There's so many variations and levels to being disabled. It's not just the outward disability. There's all kinds of things that come along with that package. But if you show that you want to have them have the experience and contribute to their experience to tell you what it is that could help to make that experience better the next time, that's really what you're looking for. So to make the assumption, well, I'm not going to do that because they're blind, what are they going to do in a Star Lab? They all got in that Star Lab. It was really an eye-opener. No pun intended.
Thank you so much. We're gonna, folks, you may have questions right now, but and you're welcome to enter questions in the chat as we're going along. Please do. But we're going to continue now with Cass Runyon's presentation on exploring space through the senses. Cass.
Okay, hi everybody. I know some of you guys. It's really good to see your names here, especially with COVID and not getting to conferences. I don't get to hug and interact with everybody. So anyway, it's good to see you guys online. I'm going to step through a process that Laura Jean and Michele have talked about a little bit. And sorry, I'm going to have a contrary opinion. We're going to talk about it a little bit. But can I have the next slide? Christine, thanks. As I've worked a lot with multiple audiences, with educators, informal educators, out of school folks, students, parents, etc., of all ages over the last, gosh, many moons. And with the sole intent of making sure that we are doing our best to engage all of these audiences and providing materials and resources so that they can better understand, in essence, science. I'd like to say engineering too. We try, but I'm not an engineer, so we rely on others to help us with that. But the key questions are, when you've got a topic that you want to share and engage the audience with, how do you represent the concepts? Or in this case, there's an image of Pluto up there that was astounding when it came back. So how do we represent that to audiences that can't see, or that may be totally blind, or can only see out of part of one eye, or visually impaired, or maybe they're colorblind or other. Coming from an artist perspective, it's really helpful to have really good descriptions. So first things that we do, like an artist might, if they're going to recreate this in a painting or a sculpture, is we look at texture, we look at the shape, the color, the size of it, the relationship back and forth to each other, the scale of things, and then try to describe that and then try to recreate it. And Christine, can you step through? So as you'll find out in a second, I have worked with a couple co-authors and we create tactile books, and the center image is our tactile model, the master for the tactile model of Pluto that became part of the Small Bodies tactile book. And then on the right is the first ever tactile NASA logo that became part of all of our book sequences. And next slide. So 2017, awesome total solar eclipse went across the whole US. We were asked to create a tactile book on that and help the blind, visually impaired, and young audiences, because the cool thing about these tactile books and the models that we make is that they're good for everybody, that you don't have to be blind or visually impaired to engage with the models and feel them. Because we look at learning styles, the kinesthetic and the tactile, and heck, even smell and taste. We don't encourage people to lick our tactiles, but certainly to feel it, describe it, and then if you've got, you know, Oreo cookies or something like that, we can bring the taste and the smell into it as they model it in real time with fun things that they might remember. So here's the sequence for the eclipse, and then next slide. Thanks. this is just awesome. It brings tears to my eyes every time I see this. In the lower foreground is Troy Klein. Some of you guys may know him from Goddard. He was instrumental in helping us with a series of workshops, started, gosh, a decade or so ago. Troy was part of the NASA crew that got to go to Micronesia to film the 2016 eclipse. And they were on a small island, and Troy is helping the chief of this Micronesian island see the eclipse for the very first time. The chief is blind. He was born blind. His eyes are sewn shut, actually. So he's never before been able to, quote unquote, see the process of the eclipse. He feels the temperature changes and hears the oohs and ahs, but this just keeps me going to keep on making these things. Anyway, next slide. And so I'm not going to go through the statistics, but this is backing up what Laura Jean and Michele are doing, and I'm sure they're NSF grant. And these numbers are fairly old, but the key thing here is that if you look at the statistics across the country, there are so many of us that have invisible and visible disabilities that we need to work with and think about when we're putting presentations together and activities or curriculum even. So next slide.
Cass, did we lose you? Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm frozen here, I think.
Somebody might be frozen. Cass, if you can hear me.
She just zapped out.
Okay, she probably lost signal, and she'll probably be right back. But while we're waiting for her, let's go ahead and let's move on to the activity, and we'll come back to the remainder of her talk in a minute. But we had a demonstration that we talked about. So Laura Jean, I'm going to go ahead and move ahead here. Laura Jean, I'll let you lead here.
Well, and I will pass it over to Michele, right? Because I think that's what a president does to their CEO. So I'll pass that one over to her. Does everybody have the blank piece of paper? Is everybody prepared to do this activity, or do you just want us to explain the activity?
Let's take a vote, folks. Go ahead and enter in the chat box now. This activity will take about 5 minutes, and it requires a piece of paper and nothing else. There's 2 stages to it. What do you all think? Are you game for trying it? What are people saying?
It seems in the chat I've got a piece of paper, would like to do the activity. I'm not able to see the slides for some reason. Happy to participate if you can describe. Okay. Yep, I have paper here, so.
Okay, so you have paper and a scissor. Okay, so then I'll go ahead and let Michele do. So the idea behind this, though, I'll just give an intro to it, is, and I just want to point out too that not all illness is a disability, and not all, just because you're differently abled as far as your learning style, that isn't a disability. I just want to make sure that that's specified. So being disabled is a specific set of categories according to the government. All right, so I don't want that to get diluted because, you know, Michele and I are both disabled, and there's a very specific type of determination that that gives that type of designation. So not all illness is a disability. Of course, an illness can cause you to be disabled, as it did in my case, but disability is not something that can be educated out of you, or weight lost out of you, or exercised out of you. So I just want to make sure that that's specified, because I don't know if I made that clear because of something I heard here. So in this case, this is to an activity that just lets you see that maybe not everybody learns the same. So it doesn't mean that they're disabled, it's just a different type of learning style. So with that, I'll give it over to Michele.
Well, first of all, we're not supposed to actually be seeing the instructions, so everyone erase it from your mind.
Oh, that's right, they're not supposed to be seeing the instructions.
All right, so we usually start out with, thank you very much. We usually start off most of our professional development workshops with this exact activity. If you have scissors, great. If not, you can just fold along the lines. So I'm going to read 10 instructions to everyone. I'm going to read it slow. I know I'm a little caffeined up right now and I've got a Jersey accent. I'm going to calm down. I'm going to read it slow. I'm going to read each bullet twice, and you are just to continue folding away no matter what happens until we get down to number 10, and we'll see how everyone did. So for the first one, find a blank piece of paper. Find a blank piece of paper. If it isn't already perfectly square, cut or fold one end of the paper until it is perfectly square. Again, if it isn't already perfectly square, cut or fold off one edge of the paper until it is perfectly square. Fold the paper in half diagonally. Again, fold the paper in half diagonally. Lay the paper down in front of you so that the longest edge is facing you. Again, lay the paper down in front of you so that the longest edge is facing you. Take the bottom of the left corner and fold it over the main area of the piece of paper so that the corner touches the opposite edge, and so that the top of the newly folded edge is parallel with the bottom of the piece of paper. Again, take the bottom left corner and fold it over the main area of the piece of paper so that the corner touches the opposite edge, and so that the top of the newly folded edge is parallel with the bottom of the piece of paper. Do the same thing to the right corner, folding it across the main area of the piece of paper until it touches the opposite edge. The top edge of this fold should be exactly on the top edge of the previous fold. Again, do the same thing to the right corner, folding it across the main area of the piece of paper until it touches the opposite edge. The top edge of this fold should be exactly on top of the edge of the previous fold. Take the outer layer of the very top corner and fold it down until the corner touches the spot where the bottoms of the other two folds meet. You should see a pattern in the shape of an X. Again, take the outer layer of the very top corner and fold it down until the corner touches the spot where the bottoms of the other two folds meet. You should see a pattern in the shape of an X. Do the same thing to the other layer, but in the opposite direction. Again, do the same thing to the other layer in the opposite direction. Spread apart the two layers on the top and gently push in the sides. Again, spread apart the two layers on the top and gently push the sides in. Did everybody make an origami cup?
It would be great if some people could start their video and let us see what you've come up with. Christy, get out.
I saw the directions though.
Oh,
That's not fair.
J.A., I like yours. Very nice. And oh, Jen, beautiful.
I expect some of these are engineers.
Brother Guy? Yeah.
I do origami, so it just made sense. So I'm a little bit of a ringer.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a cheater. I've done this one before. I used to teach fifth graders how to do it and put candy in it.
Oh, I missed the candy. I'm sorry.
Does anyone have an example that they'd like to share that's a failure?
We should have known better than to do. Thank you, Kathleen. Lovely. Mine was also a failure, by the way. I'm so happy. I feel simpatico with you.
When I tried to do this the very first time it was presented to me, I don't think I was past number 3 and I gave up. I said, forget this. I can't follow along to something like this. I totally need the step-by-step example. It was a complete disaster for me. So I love when we bring this to professional development, or especially kids, and see the crumpled up messes that they usually have at the end.
Right. And Michelle and I also teach teachers here in Bergen County. Well, she does other counties, but, you know, I work for the government, so I have to stick with my county. But I would say out of 30 teachers, an average of maybe 3 or 4 are able to do it just with the auditory instructions. So if we could go ahead then and pull up the instructions, that would be wonderful. But that's not fair. I feel like some people, it's not fair because they're engineers, and it's not fair because they know the instructions first. But I'm so happy Kathleen had something similar to mine. It makes me feel better.
And I usually read a lot faster because everyone's basically at this speed when we talk. So I did slow it down. I still failed anyway, personally, when I did this.
So when you present them with the actual instructions and they have time to slow down, you know, the people that weren't successful with the that's fine. Then that helps another percentage of your audience. But generally, when you give them the visual instructions and they can look at so they have the visual and they have the written instructions side by side, then everybody's able to make the cup at the end. And so this is just an example of not showing disabilities, because again, I want to be very specific. Disabilities are not illnesses, and they're not these other, you know, just somebody doesn't, you know, is not learning at the same pace. That doesn't necessarily indicate a disability. That's why it's important with universal design just to try to be as robust with your programming and your product as possible, and have that box, because, you know, just in case you're getting a disability or you're getting just a different ability level. Those are two different things. So generally, once you get both side by side, everybody makes the cup, and then everybody feels, you know, like they've gotten the trophy. But yeah, so that was the idea is to let people see that even within themselves, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have that you're differently abled. It just means that you are more of a visual learner than an auditory learner. That one doesn't trump the other. It's not a competition. It's just, this is the way one person learns and this is the way another person learns. So when I'm giving a lecture or I'm doing a program, or, you know, and everything I do is science. I don't unfortunately teach English or anything else. Whenever I'm doing something, I'll explain it 50 different ways until everybody in that audience feels content. Not because they're disabled, but because people just sometimes need a little additional help in learning that, in learning whatever they're trying to accomplish. They may just some people are tactile learners. So for instance, way back when I was talking to Kay Ferrari, I went out to JPL, and this was when the MER rovers were going off. And Rachel took me in the back, and she said, Rachel Bachman, I can't remember her last name, took me in the back and said, you know, can you help us? We're trying to figure out how to make like your rope, how to make people understand Europa. And I said, you could either do a 3D printing, which wasn't really big at the time. I said, or you could just make something tactile. So some things in your box may just be cotton balls or a Braille label maker, or I don't like wiki sticks. Some people do make things tactile with wiki sticks. Puff paint, things like that. Very easy to make things. It's cost efficient. It is not cost prohibitive. And once you start realizing that, you really have the ability to build up that box. And then, you know, like this dog was expensive, but
let's go ahead. I hate to cut you off, but we're running out of time, and Cass was able to rejoin us, and I'd like to let her finish her talk, please.
Absolutely.
Cass. At least I saw her name listed. Yeah. Cass?
Hi, everybody. Sorry. I don't know.
There she is.
My entire house burped and I lost everything. But I've still got power on my computer. So, and I'm linked into my cell phone. So hopefully that won't go out right now. Anyway, I don't know if I can go forward. Christine, let's keep going. In the interest of time, because I'm really interested to get people's questions and hear from them. This is where I'm going to contrast what Laura Jean and Michelle were talking about. We did 7 years worth of workshops, and the booklet that we're going to reference at the end is a culmination of what we learned working with people with all sorts of disabilities, and hidden and visible, and educators of schools for the blind, schools for the deaf. We had wheelchair riders, all manner of folks involved. For example, on the left, Gail is wearing, she's from the Virginia School for the Blind, and she's wearing a set of goggles that specifically narrows the vision down to just 5% view, which quite a few people apparently have. In the center, we've got some counselors and an educator, and on the right in that center photo is a good friend, Bob Shelton, who works at NASA Johnson Space Center, and he's a PhD mathematician that went blind at the age of 12. And he's totally blind, and he's amazing at programming and all sorts of other things. And then we're doing some electronics in the image on the right, again, with one of my students who is blind and a colleague. So through these workshops, we had NASA scientists and engineers come and present the content information, and then by their design and with their instruction, we donned simulators, whether it was mobility or visual or hearing or like you mentioned, Michelle, that you can't use your hands very well. So at some of the cerebral palsy and things like that to simulate, we used bicycle handles and put markers and things in bicycle handles so they didn't have to grasp a tiny narrow pen. And so again, it's just adapting on the fly and making things work. And again, this is all summarized in the booklet that we're going to get to. Okay, next slide. I'm trying to be cognizant of time. Again, these are all questions to think about as you're putting stuff together and working with the audiences. And these are challenges. We do a lot of workshops with teachers and educators and try to adapt different curriculum materials. So if you've got a really good idea and you want to see if it works, pull some bunch of folks together and run through, get their descriptions of what they're seeing. Do you need to hear something, or would it help if you heard something? So you're using all of your senses together. Next slide. Again, coming back to the sun, and this is using the tactile. This on the left is the tactile master for the surface. Essentially modeling the image that's on the right there with the solar burst. But to enhance it a little bit, we've added the sounds of the sun with radio from Radio Jove. So we'll play that as we go through activities and let folks explore. Again, this is the master. This is not the page that we use on thermoform that's printed in the books, but it's just an illustration. And to get this texture of the sun, it's Spanish moss and a little bit of sand in there, so you can feel the different textures. Next. And then taste. Taste is huge. It helps you remember a lot of things. So stealing an activity from one of NASA's books, Exploring Meteorite Mysteries, this is an oldie but a goodie and it's tons of fun, is describing candy bars, but edible rocks, if you will, but they can't use food terms. And so that makes it really fun for audiences of all ages, and it's just yummy too. Next. The key thing is to, and so that ties into rocks and so forth. So for audiences not familiar with rocks or soils, and they may think they're dirty, they don't want to engage with them, bring them a candy bar and let them have some fun with it. And then you can lead into something that's maybe more difficult for them to think of using color and textures and things like that. Next. And again, like Laura Jean was mentioning, have some fun, try different models, use different materials. We've in the lower left-hand corner, there's a model of the eclipse using cotton balls and different textures of cardboard. We're at the North Dakota School for the Blind there. In the upper right-hand corner, we're in a library in Columbia, and we're working with adults who are blind, and they wanted to tell the story and model the rotation and revolution of the Earth, Moon, Sun system. So they made their own 3D models so that they could feel it and describe it, and then they actually walked through, so it became a kinesthetic model as well. And then on the lower right, this is one of the more fun ones to do. This is dental amalgam. we do the traditional impact cratering exercise with flour and cocoa or whatever, it's very hard for folks that have visual impairments or that can't bend over and things to feel or see the flour and the structures that you're making. So in a real quick, fast 2 minutes, you mix up this dental amalgam, put it in a pan, and then throw marbles and golf balls and other things into it, and it sets within 2 minutes. So they can immediately interact with the models that they've created and describe it. And you can change textures before it. You can put sand and stuff over it too. So it's just a really fast thing to do. Next. More Tack Masters, and then there's the machine there for the models for the book. Next. And then these are copies of the books that are available. We have most of them. The Small Bodies is currently out of print, and I have a few copies of Mars left. So I'm offering, if you guys are interested, send Christine an email, please, and she can send me your names and addresses, and I'm happy to send out copies of these tactile books for you. We use them not just for the blind and visually impaired, but they're really good teaching tools because students can feel them, and you can use flashlights to make shadows and really engage. You'll note there's a QR code on the front of the books that links to NASA's website, where we have content describing the history and the background for each of the tactiles and more reference material. Next, I think that. And so this is the booklet that I was talking about. It's a culmination of 7 years of workshops that we did across the country, again, with the NASA scientists, engineers, a lot of educators, and actually we had students here participating in simulation. And well, and I want to enhance this, that we are not by any means, when we put the simulations on, experiencing what those people with that disability are actually experiencing. We understand that. We try to make that very clear. What we are doing, though, is offering the opportunity for those that have not yet lost vision or lost mobility to get a better sense of what that student or that audience member might be dealing with. And so then they can start thinking about how to redesign or how to modify or adapt to make that activity or the lesson plan more universal.
Thank you, Cass.
Yeah.
Awesome. We've got just a couple minutes left, so I wanted to let people enter their questions or ask them in the chat box or turn on their microphones. What questions might you have for our speakers? And then the resources that were mentioned, the Space Sciences for Everyone, and then an excerpt from it are on the website, on the Scientist Engagement website, just to let you know that those are available. But what questions do you folks have? Have you? And my top question, I'm going to stop sharing here for a second so everyone can see faces nice and big, and I know that we're running out of time, is so everything that you know, if I was going to go give a talk to a public audience tomorrow, virtually, online, about the moon, and I wanted to figure out a way to make it as accessible as possible, but it's a virtual talk. People are going to have to be joining on their computers or phones. What sorts of things might I do to make it easier for as many people to participate as possible?
Well, definitely the closed captioning is one thing that you can do right away. The other thing is if you have the capability, like Michelle's, both of us, all we do is programming, right? So this is what we do this is our lives, right? So what they're doing, and I'm doing virtual Zoom into classrooms and to stroke groups and things like that. And Michelle just, they started doing classrooms because New Jersey just open hybrid. So if you could give them materials, if you could give the teacher materials that they can give to their class, but be careful, because food is something in New Jersey they are not allowed to have in any of their programming. So if you have something that has nuts in it, that is not allowed on site in a school. If you have something at home, like you want them to do, let's say, a density program, they're not even allowed to use salt, because during the pandemic, it's been deemed that any food materials are actually not to be wasted. So that was something I was going to do the Oreo or a cookie moon phases, and it wasn't allowed because they don't want to waste money. They don't want to waste cookies. So, but the teacher actually provided everything. So those are some of the things that you can do. The other thing too is if you know that there's going to, now people don't have to tell you that they're disabled. I don't have to reveal that to anyone. But if somebody does reveal it, you can ask if there is some accommodation that they could utilize, that you could provide to them. You could give them the slides prior to the presentation as well. That way they have a way to look it up, get familiar with it. When I do any kind of programming, I do a pre-lesson, post-lesson, lesson plan, vocabulary list, activities, a journal, and I try to also give them some kind of an activity that's a federal, like let's say Project Learning Tree. That all can be provided free. So it doesn't just have to be the slides, it could be other things as well. And then of course, everything that we do is also aligned to the core curriculum content standards and the next generation science standards. Because we reach so many varied audiences, it's just easier to align everything so that you make sure that you're hitting that. So if you're doing all of that, that's really the virtual aspect has been challenging, but people are becoming acclimated to it. So when I was doing this in April virtually, it was much more difficult than I just did an Artemis program, reduce, reuse, recycle from the Earth to the Moon. The kids were really engaged this time. So there is that learning curve seems to have limited, been shortened. So if you just provide some other things like that, that could be very helpful. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm reading the chat and I do see a couple people asking how you can invite people or make it a more comfortable question when you're asking about accommodations. So on our brochures, it's standard practice. We always put to request, if you have disability related accommodations, please contact so-and-so 2 weeks prior to programming. And usually if people are concerned and have negative experiences, they are going to contact you and say, are you wheelchair accessible? Do you have ramps? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have the other thing? I'm blind. Do you have anything that's tactile? I'm hard of hearing. Do you wear an FM loop? You'll get people that ask these questions a lot. And I think just basically putting that cute little symbol of the person in the wheelchair or, the multiple disabled signal on icon on a document or website or anything, and just putting that out there makes them realize that you are considering disabilities. I think everybody thinks they're special, even though they are, and all disabilities, like I'm a C5 quadriplegic and my very good friend is the exact same level injury, and we're different. Another case in point, New York football player, Dennis Bird, who broke his neck, we had the same surgeon. When you overlaid both of our MRIs and x-rays over one another, they were identical injuries, yet today he's walking and I'm paralyzed from the chest down. So you never know what's going to walk in. Having that little slogan on your thing, it might be just the little tiny window that needed to be open for somebody to reach out.
Right, because with Michelle and let me interrupt you for a second. When we do our programs now, right, when we did the grant, we did specifically blind, specifically deaf. But now, when I do a program, I get somebody who's blind, somebody who's got autism, somebody who's cognitive impaired, somebody who's physically impaired. When we do these Bergen County Special Services or we do our groups, it is every different kind of disability you can imagine. So we have to go in ready to modify on the fly. It's not, I don't think since the grant I've had just one group. We're autistic, we're disabled. It's been 27 people that have somebody has Down syndrome, somebody has is quadriplegic, somebody has autism. So it's really if you can let people know in advance that you're willing to accommodate, then if they are looking for that accommodation, I'm going to tell you the accommodation I need. So if I know that you're willing to accommodate, I'm going to tell you. You don't have to really come up and ask me, but if you do, I appreciate that too.
And we have several questions from JA, but I'm also cognizant that we are pretty much out of time. Most of you are leaving. If you need to leave now, please do so. We would love to have your feedback. I've got a Survey Monkey survey that I will put one more time in the chat box. And so there were 3 questions from JA that I wanted to repeat one last time. The first one was any hints for virtual science education for visually impaired. But I think we heard a little bit of that about inviting them to make something and do something at home. Any other thoughts that any of our speakers might have outside of, let's say they're not able to make something there from home, is there any other suggestions?
You let your words be their eyes. Describe every single thing that you can in detail, even if they don't know the color. We found out that a young boy who we were told was blind, visually impaired, he actually had a memory of what the water in Bermuda looked like because he went on a trip that meant something to him. Knowing that, he had that knowledge, we could then move on and describe things to him. So always when you're working with somebody that's blind, visually impaired, if you can't, if they don't have access to the same material, be as descriptive as possible.
So the other question was about the social justice definition of disability. How does the government's current definition, such as the ADA's definition, differ from the social justice definition of disability?
I think the government's language comes across as being more cold. It's very medical, it's very therapy sounding, as opposed to...
I just want to stop you, Michelle. Just so people know, this is the main crux of what Michelle does. She does all of the legality and all of the all of this type of thing, so that we always go to her for that. So that's why I'm keeping quiet. So this is a good person. Any kind of questions you have about the legality issues, please feel free to email her.
Yeah, please do. My background's in social work, and even though every state's different, I do tend to find myself looking around in the local area about some things as related to disability specifically, and places that I'm working with people. But I think I know a lot of times when Laura and I were doing one of our recent webinars, I forget what word I was using, and somebody said, well, that's not the current way that it's being described, and the person was 100% right. It's not the current way being described, because with political correctness nowadays, as soon as you learn what is politically correct, I'm sure it will change.
It was Asperger's.
You always offend somebody, no matter how accommodating you try to be. So I think that it's very cold and out of date, a lot of the language, as opposed to what's flying around out there now. And they keep it that way, I think, so we don't have to get into the politics and how this person feels about having this disability. That's my belief. I don't have any other assumptions or anything more clear that I could possibly offer.
Yeah, it was Asperger's, Michelle. That was, so yeah, it was the term Asperger's, because it's been deemed now that Mr. Asperger was somebody who was complicit with the crimes of Nazis and so forth. So that was what it was. So, autism spectrum disorder. Right? So
yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what that was.
And I think it's always fair to say to somebody, I'm going back, I'm in my own head right now, I'm going back to the how do you ask for accommodations or welcome that conversation. I think I'd like to know that you have no idea what I'm talking about, so that I can educate you, so that you can therefore take that understanding and educate someone else and make the world a better place. So I think somebody with a disability that really is out there, active, wants to be a part of something, they'll welcome you saying, I'm sorry, I don't know how I can best help you. Can you please, fill me in on how I can do that, so I can try to get it the way that other people would benefit from in the future.
Well, I know that we're several minutes past the hour, but I also know that this was a wonderful conversation, a wonderful discussion, and lots of great details from all three of our presenters. I am very, very thankful to have all of you with us today, and for your time and for lending your experience and expertise. And I know that we've lost about half of our audience. People had other places they had to go to, but I'm sure that everyone agrees with me. And so thank you so very much for your time. This recording, I'm going to stop this recording now, and the final presentation will be available online afterwards. Thank everyone for joining us. Please feel free to reach out to me with questions. I'll be happy to pass them along to Cass and Laura Jean and Michele. And again, we really appreciate all of your time and expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having us.